Hello everyone, and welcome to the next video in the C++ programming course. In this video we are going to be looking over the if statement. Okay, so what we are going to do is we are going to create a simple program that asks the user to enter a name, and if the name is in a vector that we have created, it will output the message, your name is already in the vector. If the name isn't in the vector, it will add the name to the vector, and then what it will do is it will output a message saying your name has been added to the vector. Okay, so what do we have to do first? Firstly, what we have to do is we have to create a vector. Okay, and to do this, if you remember, we have to include vector. Okay, and now here we can create the vector. So what we will do is we will write vector, the type of data, and as they are names, they are going to be strings, and we'll just call it names. Okay, and here we'll just write a couple of names, so Bob, Alice, and we'll just write Tim. Okay, so now what we can do is we can ask the user for their name. Okay, so here we can just give a prompt saying please enter your name, and we have to assign it to a variable. Okay, so let's create the variable. We'll just write string name, and we'll assign it to the name variable. Okay, so that's simple enough. We've done that before. Okay, so now how can we check that the given name is in the vector? So what we can do is we can use a count function that will count the number of instances of the given name in the vector. Okay, so I will show you an example. Okay, so what I will do is first what we have to do to be able to use the count function is we have to include algorithm. Okay, so now here what I will do is I will output count, and what we have to write is the name of the vector, so names.begin, names.end, and then what we are searching for. Okay, so here I'll just write Bob. Okay, so what does this function do? It counts the number of instances of this string in this vector. So it goes from the beginning of the names vector to the end of the names vector and counts the number of instances of this given string. So here it is Bob. Okay, so as you can see, Bob appears once, so the output we should get is 1. Okay, so I will just comment this out just so you can see, and we get 1. Okay, so now if I write Bob again, we should get 2, and if I remove Bob altogether, we should get 0. There we go. Okay, so now how can we use this in the program that we are creating? Well, what we can do is count the number of times that the name appears. If the number of times the name appears is 0, that means it is not in the vector. Okay, so that's simple enough. So we'll uncomment this, and instead of outputting this, we can store the value in a variable. Okay, so we'll write create a variable called instances, and we will do that. Okay, so now we go to the if statement. Okay, so what did we say we are checking for? So if instances is 0, then we output one thing, but if it is greater than 0, we output another. If instance is greater than 0, that means that the given name is in the vector. Okay, so we'll write that first. If instances is greater than 0, this means that there is more, that the name given appears more than 0 times in the vector. Okay, so that means that the name is in the vector, and when that happens, what we will do is we will output your name is already in the vector. Okay, now if that's not the case, what we can check for is if the instance is equal to 0. So we write else if instances equals 0. So these are the signs that we used in our conditional operators. Okay, so now what we can do is if instance is 0, what we have to do is we have to add the name to the names vector. Okay, so if you remember how we do this is we do names.pushback and the name that we want to add to the vector, which is in this variable here, name. Okay, and then we can output your name has been added to the vector. Okay, so that's simple enough. So now what we have to remember is we have to change this from Bob to name, because that is what is given from the user. Okay, so now if we save and run this, it should work. Okay, so please enter your name. The first thing we'll check for is if it works, if the name that we give is already in the vector. Okay, so I will give the name Bob, and what should happen is because Bob is in the names vector, it should output your name is already in the vector. Okay, so I'll enter this, and as you can see, it's correct. Your name is already in the vector. Okay, so now what we will do is we'll put in a name that isn't in the vector. So what we can do is I'll just type Tom instead of Tim, and it says your name has been added to the vector. Okay, so that's simple enough. Now, hopefully you should have been able to spot here that I didn't need to use an else if statement, because if instances isn't greater than 0, it must be equal to 0, because you can't have -1 of the count of a name in the names vector. Okay, so what we could have just written here is just else, and it would have worked. Okay, so we'll test that. So I'll just change it to else, and if I write Bob, it will work as usual, and if I write Tom, it works as usual, because as I mentioned before, if it's not greater than 0, it's going to be equal to 0. Okay, so hopefully you were able to understand that. What you can do is just play around with it, create simple games, and just work on your if statements. And in the next video, what we will look at is nested if statements. So I hope you were able to follow along, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.